I fell into the deep end, and I couldn't swim. Water closed over my head. My lungs screamed for air. I saw blurred shapes above the surface, shouting my name. Someone dove in fast, fully clothed. Without a single hesitation, strong arms wrapped around me, pulling me toward the light. I opened my eyes and saw hers first, full of fear. She saved my life that day. Total stranger to me. I never imagined she would change everything I thought I knew. My name is Madison Carter, 31. A high school English teacher in Millbrook, Georgia, where everyone knew everyone and secrets rarely stayed buried for long. That summer afternoon at the community pool was supposed to be ordinary. Just me trying to relax after a hard year. Before my whole world flipped. Her name was Jordan Reyes, the new lifeguard everyone in town had been gossiping about since she arrived from Atlanta that spring. She wrapped a towel around my shoulders, checked my pulse, and stayed beside me until the paramedics confirmed I would be fine. "You scared me," she said quietly, her voice rough, like she'd been holding her breath the entire time she pulled me out. I laughed nervously, embarrassed that half the pool had watched a grown woman nearly drown in 4 feet of water. She visited me the next day at school, claiming she wanted to make sure I hadn't inhaled too much chlorine. We talked for 2 hours on the bleachers, about nothing important, yet somehow it felt like the most honest conversation I'd had in years. She offered to teach me how to swim properly, said nobody should carry that kind of fear around for so long. I agreed, telling myself it was only about conquering an old fear. Nothing more complicated than that. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she waited for me at the shallow end, patient in a way few people ever were with me. She never rushed me, never made me feel foolish for flinching every time water touched my face. Slowly, the lessons became less about swimming and more about the easy silences that grew comfortable between us. I started looking forward to those evenings more than I wanted to admit, even to myself. One evening she noticed the old scar on my wrist from a childhood accident and asked gently what had happened. I told her about my mother, who drowned in a lake when I was 9, and why water had terrified me ever since. Jordan didn't offer empty comfort. She simply held my hand under the water until my breathing slowed. That was the first time I let myself cry in front of someone since the funeral, over a decade ago. She walked me to my car that night, and neither of us mentioned how long we'd lingered by the door. My best friend Renee teased me, asking if I had a crush on the swim instructor, and I laughed it off too quickly. But at night, I found myself replaying Jordan's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she teased me about my terrible backstroke. I told myself this was just gratitude, the natural bond between a rescuer and the person she pulled from drowning. Then one Thursday, she showed up with 2 coffees and admitted she looked forward to our lessons all week too. We started meeting outside the pool, grabbing dinner at a diner off Route 9 where nobody from school ever went. She told me about growing up in Atlanta, about coming out to her parents at 19 and losing her father's approval overnight. I admired how openly she spoke about herself, while I still hid so much of who I really was. One night, walking along the river, she asked if I'd ever been in love with a woman before. My heart pounded so hard I thought she could hear it, but I only managed a quiet, uncertain maybe. She didn't push further, just smiled and said maybe was a good place to start figuring things out. I lay awake that night, replaying every moment we'd shared, finally admitting to myself what I'd been avoiding for weeks. I was falling for a woman, and for the first time, the fear didn't feel like drowning at all. The next lesson, I finally floated on my back unassisted, and Jordan cheered like I'd won an Olympic medal. In that same breath, she reached for my hand underwater, and I let her hold it without pulling away. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," she admitted, water dripping from her lashes, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer with words. I simply leaned closer until our foreheads touched, breathing in the chlorine and courage between us. We didn't kiss that night, but something shifted, an unspoken agreement that we were no longer just teacher and student. Renee noticed the change in me immediately. The way I smiled at my phone. The way I stopped talking about men entirely. I confided in her one night, terrified of her reaction. And she surprised me by simply hugging me tightly. "I've known you liked girls since junior year," she said. "I was just waiting for you to catch up." Relief flooded through me. But I begged her to keep it quiet. Not ready for Millbrook to know yet. Jordan and I started sneaking away on weekends, driving 2 towns over where no one recognized either of us. She took me to her favorite bookstore in Savannah, and I bought her a worn copy of a poetry collection. Every mile away from Millbrook felt like shedding a layer of armor I hadn't realized I was wearing. One rainy afternoon in her apartment, she finally kissed me, soft and unhurried, like she'd been waiting for permission. I kissed her back without hesitation, surprised by how natural it felt after years of forcing myself into other shapes. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I pulled you out of that pool," she whispered against my lips. We started dating quietly, careful about where we were seen, cautious of Millbrook's long memory and longer tongues. She met me after school sometimes, parking 2 blocks away just so no student would connect the dots. I hated the hiding, but I told myself it was temporary, until I found the courage to be honest. My father, a respected deacon at First Baptist, called every Sunday, always asking when I'd finally bring home a nice young man. I deflected each time, guilt tightening in my chest a little more with every lie I let slide. Jordan never pressured me to come out before I was ready, though I sometimes saw the hurt behind her patience. "I'm not ashamed of you," she said once. "I just don't want to be your secret forever." I promised her it wasn't about shame. It was about surviving in a town that hadn't changed in decades. She accepted that answer, though I could tell some small part of her needed more than promises. We spent stolen weekends at the coast, walking barefoot on empty beaches where we could finally just be ourselves. I started imagining a future with her, something I'd never truly let myself picture with anyone before. For the first time since my mother died, water felt like something I could trust again. Because of her, I taught myself to swim the length of the pool alone, and Jordan cried watching from the edge. "So proud. You're not the same scared woman I pulled out of the water months ago," she told me, eyes shining. She was right. I was becoming someone braver, someone I almost didn't recognize but desperately wanted to keep being. Then, on a warm October evening, everything I'd tried so carefully to protect came crashing down without warning. A student's older sister spotted us holding hands at a gas station and posted about it before I even got home. By morning, half of Millbrook's group chats were buzzing with speculation about Ms. Carter and the lifeguard. My principal called me into his office, voice gentle but firm, mentioning concerns from parents about my personal life. He didn't fire me outright, but he warned that my contract renewal depended on avoiding further distractions at school. I felt sick with fear, imagining losing the only career I'd worked so hard to build since college. My father called that same afternoon, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard directed at me before. "Tell me it isn't true," he said, and when I stayed silent, I heard something in him break. He told me I was welcome home only if I ended things and got right with God. His exact words. I hung up the phone and sobbed harder than I had since the day we buried my mother. Jordan showed up within the hour, holding me while I shook, whispering that none of this was my fault. Renee, of all people, suggested maybe I should lay low with Jordan until the gossip died down naturally. Her words stung more than I expected. A small betrayal from the one person I thought fully understood me. "So you want me to hide too?" I snapped, and our friendship cracked under a tension neither of us addressed. Meanwhile, my ex-boyfriend Caleb, whom I dated in college, reached out claiming he'd always known and wanted to help. His help turned out to be spreading his own version of our past relationship to anyone who'd listen at church. Some parishioners began treating me like a stranger, whispers following me down aisles I'd walked my whole life. Jordan started pulling back too, worried her presence was only making my situation at school and home worse. Maybe I should leave town, she said one night, before I ruin everything you've built here. The thought of losing her on top of everything else felt like drowning all over again, this time with no rescuer. I begged her to stay, promising I would find a way through this, even if I didn't yet know how. She agreed to stay. But something guarded crept into her eyes that hadn't been there before. A week later, I found an old shoebox in my closet while packing, hoping to move out of my father's house for good. Inside was a letter my father had written decades ago to his own younger brother, my Uncle Thomas. The letter begged Thomas to come home, said family mattered more than whatever the town thought it knew about him. I stared at it, stunned, realizing my father had once loved a gay brother enough to defend him. I confronted my father with the letter, demanding to know why he'd never mentioned Uncle Thomas to me at all. His face went pale, and for the first time, I saw guilt instead of judgment in his eyes. Thomas died before you were born, he admitted, and I've spent my whole life regretting how long it took me to write that letter. He said Thomas passed away in a car accident 3 weeks after receiving it, never getting the chance to come home. My father's hardness suddenly made a painful kind of sense. Grief disguised as rigid, fearful control for 30 years. Though, understanding him didn't erase the ultimatum he'd given me, and I left his house that night anyway. Jordan let me stay with her, though the small apartment felt tense under the weight of everything unresolved between us. The school. The board scheduled a hearing to review my contract, citing conduct unbecoming without ever naming the real reason. I hired a lawyer Renee recommended, despite our strained friendship, because some bonds run deeper than one hard conversation. The lawyer said Georgia law offered little direct protection, but public pressure and parent support could still sway the board. Students I'd taught for years started a petition defending me, catching me completely off guard with their loyalty. Meanwhile, Jordan received a job offer in Charleston, better pay, a fresh start somewhere nobody knew our complicated history. She didn't tell me about it at first. I found the offer letter by accident on her kitchen counter. Why didn't you say anything? Asked, feeling the ground shift beneath us all over again. Because I don't know if I'm staying, she admitted. And I didn't want to pressure you into deciding for me. We fought that night. Both scared. Both exhausted from carrying secrets and consequences we never asked for. She accused me of never being ready to choose her over my father's approval. And the words cut deep because they weren't entirely wrong. I accused her of running whenever things got hard, just like she said she'd never do again after her last relationship. She went quiet at that, and I realized I'd hit something real, a wound from her past I didn't fully understand yet. She finally told me about Elena, her ex-partner, who'd been outed at her job and lost custody of her daughter in the fallout. Jordan had watched Elena fall apart, powerless to help, and swore she'd never again love someone who might vanish under pressure. I'm not her, I said softly, and you're not powerless anymore. Not unless you decide to be. We sat in silence a long time, neither of us with answers, both of us terrified of losing the other. 2 days later, Elena showed up unannounced at Jordan's apartment, and my stomach dropped the moment I saw her face. She wasn't there to reclaim Jordan, though she was desperate, needing a place to stay after losing her apartment in Charleston. Jordan let her stay on the couch for a few nights, and I tried hard not to let jealousy poison my judgment. Watching them together, old friends with history I could never fully share, made my insecurities louder than they'd ever been. One night I overheard them talking about the daughter Elena had lost custody of, and my anger softened into aching sympathy instead. Elena caught me listening and later told me plainly, "Jordan talks about you like you're the first safe thing in years." Her words eased something tight in my chest, though the tension in the apartment didn't fully disappear for days. Meanwhile, the school board hearing arrived faster than I was ready for. My hands shaking as I walked into the room. Parents on both sides packed the meeting, some holding signs supporting me, others demanding my immediate dismissal. My father, to my shock, sat quietly in the back row, arms crossed, expression unreadable through the entire hearing. A parent stood and read a private text of mine aloud, one that had clearly been leaked by someone close to me. I scanned the room, done, until I saw Renee's face crumple. And I understood before she even confessed. She admitted afterward, sobbing, that she'd shown the text to her sister just to vent, never expecting it to spread further. It wasn't malice, just carelessness born from her own unresolved fear about what my being out might mean for our friendship. I was furious, but seeing her genuine devastation, I couldn't hate her the way I initially wanted to. The board deliberated for what felt like hours while I waited outside, Jordan gripping my hand the entire time. When they called us back in, the vote came down narrowly in my favor. My contract renewed with a formal warning. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees nearly buckled, and Jordan caught me before I could fall. Outside, my father approached me for the first time in weeks, his voice rough with something I hadn't heard before. "I didn't come to change your mind," he said. "I came because your mother would never forgive me if I lost you too." It wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was the first crack in a wall I'd thought permanent. That same week, Elena found a new apartment and moved out, thanking us both before disappearing back into her own life. Jordan turned down the Charleston job the next morning, telling me Millbrook finally felt like somewhere worth staying for. I should have felt only joy, but a new fear crept in, that I was the reason she was giving up something better. "You're not holding me back," she said, reading the doubt on my face instantly. "You're the reason I want to build something." We started attending a small support group 2 towns over, meeting other LGBTQ couples navigating small-town southern life like ours. For the first time, I didn't feel like the only person in the world carrying this particular kind of fear. My father started attending grief counseling, something I never imagined a man like him would ever agree to try. He mentioned Uncle Thomas more often now, small stories slipping out like he was finally allowing himself to grieve properly. One Sunday, he asked if he could meet Jordan properly, not as a rumor, but as a person in my life. I agreed cautiously, terrified of another disaster, but desperate for some version of reconciliation with the only parent I had left. Dinner was stiff and awkward, full of long silences, but he shook Jordan's hand and thanked her, sincerely, for saving my life. It wasn't acceptance yet. Not fully. But it was more than I dared to hope for just weeks earlier. Meanwhile, Renee and I slowly rebuilt our friendship, her guilt driving her to become one of my loudest public defenders. She organized a small fundraiser for LGBTQ students at our school, dedicating it, quietly, to make up for her mistake. Jordan proposed we move in together that spring. A small step that felt enormous given everything we'd survived. I said yes without hesitation, surprising myself with how easily the fear had finally loosened its grip on me. We found a little house near the lake, the same lake where my mother had drowned all those years ago. Standing at the shore with Jordan beside me, I finally felt ready to let go of that old grief for good. We held a small, private ceremony there. Just us and a handful of people who truly mattered, releasing white flowers into the water. My father came, standing a little apart from the others, but present, which meant more to me than any speech could. That evening, he pulled me aside and handed me an old photograph of my mother, smiling, standing at that very lake. "She would have loved Jordan," he said quietly. The closest thing to a blessing he'd ever given me. I cried harder than I had in years, finally feeling the weight of decades of grief and fear begin to lift. Word spread through Millbrook, as it always did. But this time the reaction surprised me more than I expected. Several other quiet whispers emerged. Other people in town who'd been hiding parts of themselves for years, finally feeling less alone. A young student came to me privately, tears in her eyes, thanking me for simply existing openly at our school. I realized then that surviving my own fear had quietly given someone else permission to imagine surviving theirs too. Months later, the school board announced a diversity and inclusion assembly, inviting me, cautiously, to speak about my experience. I hesitated for days, terrified of standing in front of the entire student body and telling my story out loud. Jordan reminded me how far I'd come since the day she pulled me, gasping, from the deep end of that pool. On the morning of the assembly, my hands shook so badly I nearly canceled, convinced I wasn't brave enough after all. Then I saw my father sitting quietly in the audience, in the front row, waiting for me without a word. I walked onto that stage and told them everything: the drowning, the fear, the lies, the slow terrifying climb toward honesty. I told them about my mother, about Uncle Thomas, about how silence had cost my family more than the truth ever could. Halfway through, my voice cracked, and I saw Jordan mouth "I've got you" from the side of the auditorium. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I feared I'd made a terrible mistake standing up there at all. Then my father stood first, plotting, and slowly the entire auditorium rose to their feet around him. Afterward, several students lined up just to hug me, whispering their own struggles, their own quiet drowning they hadn't named yet. That night, walking to the parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in over a decade of hiding pieces of myself. Jordan was waiting by my car, holding 2 coffees, exactly like the first night we'd admitted something was growing between us. "I'm proud of you," she said. And this time neither of us worried about who might be watching us kiss. A local news station picked up the story, framing it as a small-town teacher's courage instead of scandal for once. The attention brought unexpected support, alumni donations, a scholarship fund, and letters from strangers who'd faced similar battles across the country. It also brought one final pinfule surprise: Caleb. I published an op-ed twisting our history to seem scandalous and predatory. I was terrified the goodwill would collapse overnight, undone by one bitter man's need to control a narrative he no longer owned. But Renee, working with the lawyer, found records proving Caleb had actually pursued and pressured me long after we'd broken up. The paper issued a correction, and Caleb quietly stopped showing his face anywhere near Millbrook after that public embarrassment. It was the final piece falling into place, proof that truth, however delayed, eventually outlasted every lie built against it. My contract was renewed the following year without controversy, my name mentioned now for teaching awards instead of scandal. My father started coming to Sunday dinners at our little house by the lake, awkward but steadily more comfortable each visit. He even hung Uncle Thomas's old photograph in his living room, finally giving his brother the space he denied him in life. Jordan and I planted flowers along the lake path that spring, a small garden dedicated quietly to my mother's memory. Renee became a regular at our dinner table too, her guilt long since transformed into genuine, steady friendship. Elena wrote occasionally, thriving in Charleston, eventually winning partial custody back with the help of a good lawyer in time. Watching Jordan read Elena's letters without fear reminded me how far both of us had traveled from where we'd started. One quiet evening by the lake, Jordan knelt and asked me to marry her. No cameras. No crowd. Just us and the water. I said yes before she even finished the question, tears mixing with laughter as the sun set behind us. We married the following spring at that same lake, my father walking me down a short grassy aisle himself. Standing there, hand in Jordan's, I finally understood that the day I nearly drowned had actually been the beginning of my life. Every fear I'd carried for years dissolved into something steadier: gratitude, courage, and a love I no longer needed to hide. I used to believe drowning was the worst thing that could happen to me, until I spent years drowning quietly in silence and fear instead. Jordan taught me to swim, to love, and to finally breathe freely as myself, in the open, without apology, for good. Fendi.